Church of the Larger Fellowship, a Unitarian Universalist congregation with no geographical boundaries. We believe in cultivating curiosity and transformation that is rooted in profound love. The COVID-19 pandemic has irrevocably shaped how connections are formed in congregations across the United States and the world. The Church of the Larger Fellowship is committed to being a resource within Unitarian Universalism and beyond. From worship to covenant groups, from classes to pastoral care, and from our monthly magazine Quest to our online community hub and our letter writing ministry. We have found ways to build connection and community, even through the screen. We have been a model for ministry on the margins, providing services for isolated Unitarian Universalists, becoming a spiritual lifeline for our members in prison. The CLF supports the ministries of those who hold target identities: Blue, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism; Trust, Transgender Religious UU Professionals Together; and Drum, Diverse Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Multicultural Ministries, just to name a few. We know better than anyone how deep and meaningful connections can be formed, even from a distance. Unitarian Universalists have faced many challenges in these times, and we continue to persevere and fight for justice and equity for all people, especially during moments of crisis. We are proud to be a leader in this faith movement, and we invite you to get involved in our ministry. We strive to be a place where anyone from anywhere can find spiritual refuge anytime they need it. Welcome to the Church of the Larger Fellowship. We are so excited to bring you an all-new episode of The VUU. The VUU is a weekly Unitarian Universalist talk show discussing important faith-based topics from an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and multicultural perspective. Every Thursday for the past 7 years, we have welcomed guests from every corner of the world. Our guests are writers, scholars, activists, and religious thought leaders who are shaping Unitarian Universalism and society for the 21st century and beyond. I hope today's show inspires you. Hope it builds your faith. Hope it gives you perspective to see the power of Unitarian Universalism at work in your life. Enjoy the message. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The VUU. I am Aisha Hauser. My pronouns are she and her, and I come to you from the land of the Coast Salish people, also known as Seattle, Washington. Michael.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Tino, another third of the lead ministry team here at the Church of the Larger Fellowship. I'm coming to you from Peekskill, New York, a little north of New York City, the land of the Kitchewan and Wappinger people. And my pronouns are they and them. And it's good to be back with the voices of Unitarian Universalism, which is commonly known as the VUU, or if you're Kiana Dene Perkins, the VUU.
The VUU.
VUUers. And we have some people already here in our chat that we want to say good morning to, good afternoon if you're in on the East Coast, or good evening if you're in Europe, or good whatever time it is that you're listening to our podcast.
Before we dive into today, that the VUU in the coming weeks, we will. We're working on having a show dedicated to supporting families who with non-binary and trans children, and folks who are themselves non-binary and trans. And we want to be diligent with that, and so that is coming. I don't know when yet. We don't have that set. But if you all are out there who know resources or folks we can ask to be on who may not be in UU World, please let us know. Just feel free to email clfuu@clfuu.org. Is that right?
I think it's clf@clfuu.org.
CLF@clfuu.org. Yes, so that we can put that together. Today we have a show at ways that folks who are not Arab or Palestinian and who want to advocate for Palestine. We will be talking about that today with Reverend Meagan Henry and Reverend Annie Gonzalez, and I will introduce both of them right now. Annie is the Minister of Faith Development at First Parish in Bedford, where she's served since 2018. She lives in a communally owned home in Malden, Massachusetts, with 3 adults, 2 of whom are UU ministers, and her 8-year-old Moira, half of the time, 2 amazing 11-month-old babies, and a dog. I mean, how fun is it? We have to do a whole show on that, Annie. Reverend Meagan Henry is a lifelong Unitarian Universalist and longtime religious educator, and is the assistant minister at First Unitarian Congregational Society in Brooklyn, New York. Welcome to you both. I mean, there's nothing about this topic that's not heavy, and it is only, when people say this issue is complicated, the issue itself is not complicated. I think where my experience of especially white folks and POC who aren't Arab, the complication comes in how to talk about this in a way that doesn't immediately, because especially in the first couple of months, immediately people were called anti-Semitic. Immediately there was this effort to shut down folks who are saying, hey, this is what's happening is really, really bad. What's happening is genocide. What's happening is atrocities. I think now over 130, 40 days in, and Gaza's basically leveled, that to me, that pushback doesn't hold any water anymore. I mean, there needs to be advocacy for humanity. So I'm just going to jump in and have either one of you can start. Meagan, if you feel comfortable, Meagan, your connection to all of this, because you do have a personal connection, or at least one, if you could start.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Michael and Annie. It's great to be here with you all. I really appreciate the opportunity. So my personal connection with this issue is, I would say it goes back a long time, but the most recent deep connection is that I have Jordanian family who live in Jordan and are very close to the current conflict that's happening, and that the conflict that's been happening for a really long time. So my daughter is married to a Jordanian man, and they have a baby, and they live here now live in the US now, and they my daughter lived in Jordan for 5 years, and as a young adult, right out of grad school. And when I went to visit her there, we went to Palestine, we went to Israel, we went to Jerusalem, and we went to the West Bank. And I just learned a lot more about the issue from being there and seeing the walls and going through checkpoints. And because my daughter speaks Arabic fluently, we were traveling with Arab-speaking population. So we were part of that group of folks that are certainly treated like second-class citizens there, and had that experience, and also met a lot of displaced Palestinians who live in Jordan, which is a huge part of that population. And then I hosted as my seminary project at Meadville Lombard. I took a group of UUs to Jordan, where we did some more deep learning around the United States involvement in the Middle East, and talked a lot about Islamophobia and the ways in which we have been conditioned here in the United States to be. We have so much bias that we sometimes don't even realize, and that how our society has conditioned us around Islamophobia and anti-Arab sentiment. So I have some personal connection, and also just my own human connection to feeling compassion and the inherent worth and dignity and our interconnectedness.
Thank you. And Annie, I think one of the things that's important, why I was really grateful that the two of you said yes to being on the program today, is even if you have no connection, being a human being, especially a faith leader, especially you, but being human, there is a human imperative to advocate for the Palestinians.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I will say I'm one of the many people, and I think there's a lot of us who did not do any significant organizing in support of Palestine until this fall, right? It was certainly an issue I, was aware of and supported. I, would post a Facebook thing or donate to a fundraiser or something like that during some of the previous, attacks on Gaza that were very egregious. But it was not central to my organizing. I primarily organize around immigration justice and police and prison abolition. But of course, it's all connected. And you can't really be organizing for abolition and not be locally and domestically and not be thinking about the interconnected ways that policing and imperialism and militarism, it's all the same system. And so, I'm one of those people who, kind of took a moment to just pivot or add in organizing specifically around ceasefire and specifically in an interfaith context, because I felt like from my role as a faith leader, that was something I could do. And that was something I felt compelled to do. Exactly as you said, Aisha, just as a human who cares about human beings and their dignity and their lives.
Where do folks start? Where do folks who are afraid? Because I think there's still, I'm grateful that more and more people are being much more vocal about support of Palestine, especially after the International Court of Justice case. Thank you, South Africa. And now there's a whole nother case that's been brought about the settlements and about the occupation by a whole host of other countries. So where do folks start? What would you both say? And Michael, please feel free to jump in. I know I'm very passionate.
I'm good.
Well, one place I would really recommend people start is with listening, deep listening, because this is a subject that so many of us in the U.S. Have an enormous amount of unexamined bias about. And I would say also educating ourselves, and I would even say especially about Christian Zionism.
Yes.
Say more for those who don't know. Say more about that.
So growing up, so part of my formation as a young person was my experiences of living in the Bible Belt in the South, in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. And I went to a Southern Baptist boarding school in Kentucky when I was in high school. That's where I graduated high school from. And I, during that time, was exposed to a lot of Christian Zionism, and that being around this idea that Christians believe that Armageddon will happen when the Jews are in control of the land around where Israel is and now, and then the occupied territories.
And specifically when they've reconstructed the temple.
Thank you. Yes.
What Jewish people call the Temple Mount, but what is now the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is one of the holiest sites in Islam.
Yeah.
And, it's the reason, let's be clear, why the U.S. Embassy is now in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why the last president, whose name shall not be uttered, moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem because he was appeasing Christian Zionists who want Israel to control all of Jerusalem for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
For that exact reason, and it's disgusting.
Yeah. One of the things I find so insidious about it is the idea that Christians are supporting Jewish people, when I have experienced so much anti-Semitism from that particular part of the Christian community. That part, not all Christian communities by any means, but certainly it's this idea. It's just this really crazy disconnect around this like Christian Zionist kind of need, desire to at one time be, they will say very anti-Semitic things and they will be very anti-Semitic, and at the same time then support Zionism. So it's just, I think it's a really important thing for people to learn more about. I definitely know that I need to learn more about it too, just from the small amounts of it that I've been exposed to. But I feel like that is in play right now quite a bit.
Yeah, that's an important piece, and I think there's so many ways for us to go deeper. And I'm saying, when I say us, I'm talking about people who share my demographics of being a white, non-Jewish Unitarian Universalist who benefits from Christian privilege, who is a citizen of the United States, where in so many ways we have built and are perpetuating these systems in so many ways that we've contributed to this situation of violence very directly, obviously, with our very direct aid that is funding these bombs. But of course, historically, in the ways that, just the colonialism, the anti-Semitism that the United States, the refusal of refugees after World War II, there's so many ways that I feel like my country is causing this, contributing to this very directly, making it possible. So I feel like it's very important. But you asked about where to start, and I think that's where I've started personally. I think there's a lot of ways to start. Like, you can start with education for sure, because there's so much to learn. Where I've started with is advocacy that's directed at the United States government, because without the United States government, this slaughter would not be happening. This is on us. This is our money. It's our taxes. And so, I've done a lot of ceasefire organizing, targeting, senators and representatives in the House of Representatives, pushing them, and now I know there's a lot of organizing targeting Biden right now as well that people can get involved with. It can be as simple as, writing in, ceasefire or undecided, or, in Michigan, they just did the, I forget exactly what phrase they used, but unaffiliated or something.
Yeah.
Vote in the primary, just to show, just to demonstrate to Biden how many people are opposed to his support of genocide. And that's a very simple thing. But I think in most parts of the country, there is organizing you can plug into, that you can just try showing up, just go to a rally or a march or something and just kind of check out the scene. If you're nervous, go with a buddy. You don't have to yell any chants yet, but go and see what it's like. That's kind of what I would say, especially if you're feeling nervous and scared. You might have to go and do it before you feel it or feel confident or feel like you know enough. A lot of people say they don't know enough, but I don't think you have to know very much to know that our tax dollars are funding bombs that are murdering children and civilians. If you know that, you know enough to go advocate to your own government.
Right.
Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, I was just going to expound on that are bombing refugee camps, that are withholding aid, that are starving. 2 million people are in peril of starvation, 600,000 of whom are actively starving in Gaza. So, I mean, and yeah, it's U.S. government support that's making that possible.
Meagan, were you part of the shutting down the Brooklyn Bridge? Here in Seattle, there's been, they've shut down I-5, they've shut down bridges, they being the awesome protesters. So I'm wondering if you were new folks who organize. I mean, that is powerful, and it what is the word? It makes people it inconveniences people, and I'm like, you get to go home eventually into your warm bed and food. So you're inconvenienced, and there's an entire society that we're paying for to be decimated. So anyway,
yeah,
love to hear about that.
Yeah, I was part of the large coordinated action that happened in Lower Manhattan to shut down bridges and tunnels into and out of the city. And it was the first time that I've participated in an action that led to an arrest in New York City or New York State. I have done that before in Tennessee, but this was the first time doing it here. And it's been a little while since I got arrested, but I went into it knowing it was an arrestable action. I went into it knowing that I was part of an interfaith clergy and religious people affinity group. that was led by this amazing rabbinical student who was an incredible leader and pastoral presence. I invited a couple other UUs I know to join me. And then, we were a small group that was then part of this much larger, I think over 400 people were arrested ultimately, and we shut down traffic for around an hour or an hour and a half on a weekday morning in Lower Manhattan. So it was based on a prior action, using a model from a prior action. So it felt very empowering, effective, a little bit scary at times, very supported. And at the same time, like, I would say that something like that's a big thing to do. And I definitely recommend having some experiences being involved in protest or action or a nonviolent, even kind of like action training or something like that before doing an arrestable action, if possible. But going into it really being very prepared and knowing exactly what you're you can never know exactly what you're getting into, but having some idea of what you're going into and knowing that there's support. So this was a massive and very supported action with very incredible legal support and police support, and the police department seemed to be pretty overwhelmed by this action. And so many people were in jail or held in some way or another for many, many, many hours, like all day into the night. Yeah. And some people didn't get out until the next morning. So you have to be kind of prepared for something like that when you're doing an action this large. And I'm really proud of the fact that I did it. I'm really proud of the people that I did it with. And I saw an amazing UU minister jump into action as a de-escalator when people got angry that traffic was being stopped. So I was really inspired to get de-escalation training after witnessing that. So it's. And I have also participated in protests around the city, marches, many of which, just taking over the streets. And there are all kinds of, Jewish Voices for Peace has been amazing around also the Palestinian youth movement, Within Our Lifetime movement. There's a lot of groups that are very organized and have a lot of training. And they are doing safety stuff all around. So they're blocking traffic. It's just a really coordinated and really well handled kind of situation, but it's always a little bit unpredictable as well.
I think the thing that is important that I want to communicate, gone are the days of, and it was only true for a very small group of people in this country, this idea that we can separate ourselves, we being folks in the United States, or have this kind of cluelessness, this naivete. I never had it. I'm an immigrant. I'm an Arab. Like, it's not something I have, but it's something I observed even as a kid, of this kind of like wide-eyed, like, oh, but we're in America and everybody loves us and we're so great and everybody wants to come here. At this point, I think one of the things that social media has done, the world would not know as much as it knows if it wasn't for social media. And at this point, there's so many people connecting the dots of what, we started with this, right? Annie talking about really holding accountable Biden and the Democrats. We already, us being liberals, have no lost love for the Republican Party or whatever, people, who are who tend to be right wing. And now we're realizing just how much actually the the major political parties, really there is zero difference when it comes to this issue. I know there are with other issues, but this issue, if anything, Biden is very clear saying the only place a Jewish person on TikTok shared Biden saying the only place Jews are safe are in Israel. And this Jewish man said, please stop saying that. Like, first of all, there's millions of Jewish people in the United States. And like, basically, what the fuck are you saying? Like, why Jewish people need to be safe everywhere? So that's even like a really fucked up statement. But I think the thing, even if folks who are not Arab, not Jewish, not, think they're disconnected from this stuff is going to hit us quicker, and it is already, even financially, blah blah blah. What am I trying to say? If people are choosing not to either, are choosing not to get involved, you will be impacted by this. That every single person in this country is being impacted and will be impacted in some way by what's happening. We all have a vested interest.
That's yeah, I think that's very well said. And I think the way that Biden has handled this genocide, the way he's supporting it, has really been a wake up call to a lot of people who maybe were not quite ready to see how harmful the current administration is. I said my primary organizing is in immigration justice, and he's terrible. Terrible. So I understand I'm not one of those people who says, oh, it's exactly the same as Trump, but I really think that those of us who've now mobilized around ceasefire, mobilized around this issue, are seeing so clearly, like, this will not do. And if there's anything that I take away from the organizing that's hopeful, because I feel like everything is just devastating. Like, it's just devastating everywhere. It looks everything, I can't see much for hope. But I will say that I think the organizing around this issue, it is bringing people who were maybe not seeing certain things into seeing them. And it's also bringing people together. And that makes me feel a little bit of hope, because locally, this ceasefire organizing has brought together groups that have not been doing interfaith organizing. And I live with a very brilliant UU minister who's a very brilliant organizer, and she's one of the 3 core people who started bringing together this coalition. Her name's Elizabeth Wynn, for anybody who wonders.
Yes.
But
Love Elizabeth.
The group that started bringing together the interfaith, we're calling like the Boston Interfaith Coalition for Ceasefire or something. Both, of course, to push for ceasefire, very much so, and also to build a coalition that is bigger, that we're going to need, because it looks like the fascism is coming harder and, more so than ever. And we're going to need it. And we're going to need it even if Trump isn't elected. We're going to need it no matter what. But we're going to need it if Trump is elected. And I think, or if he isn't elected and takes it over, or whatever the heck's going to happen. And it's been so powerful, because there's been Jewish and Muslim folks coming together that have not been coming together before. And it's been really beautiful seeing the questions people have been asking. Like somebody was like, can I bring some rabbinical students? And somebody's like, what's a rabbinical student? You know what I mean? And then all the diet, like, we didn't have enough kosher food at the last big dinner at the mosque. And but that's so wonderful. And so that's the only thing I'm seeing positive out of just so much deeply devastating death and destruction, is a wake up call that's bringing people together.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to, I had a moment of oof to Nicole Thibodeau saying, at what point does paying U.S. taxes qualify as a war crime? Friend, I feel like it does now. Not for nothing.
Yes.
Woo!
That's right.
Can we be clear, like, Thoreau thought it did too in the 19th century.
I mean, true.
This is not anything new.
No.
Right? U.S. foreign policy has been a nightmare since U.S. became a nation.
Yeah, I mean, the first protest I went to was against the, Iraq war, after 9/11. I mean, this is not new even to a youngin' like me.
Listen, just to digress for a second about immigration. So I got a green card when I was just under 2 years old. I didn't get naturalized until I was 19. So when people fucking are like, oh, people got to get in line, I'm like, what line? It's fucking arbitrary. And after the, Ukraine's still being bombed, but the West is supporting Ukraine. Somebody said to me, what's the difference between, why are people paying attention to this being Palestine, not Ukraine? I said, Ukraine has the support of the West and weapons and an army. Are you people kidding? But they
a whole nation full of white people.
And they're streamlining immigration of Ukrainians. And Congress more than once has said, we got to make sure we don't take any more Palestinians. Are you fucking kidding me?
But it's just, this is not the first genocide that the United
No.
States
By far not.
has turned away from and pretended it didn't exist.
Well, we're founded on genocide, right? Like that's where we come from, mass slaughtering people to take their land. That's the name of our game. And like, of course we're supporting other states that do that. Of course, because that's where this country comes from. And I think that's something that people don't want to see because it's deeply painful. But I think that's part of it. Like when you want to go deep into really understanding settler colonialism and how it's playing out in Israel, you have to see how it has always played out on this continent. Well, not always, but just since Europeans started doing it on this continent. And how all of our foreign policy is deeply connected to exactly what is happening right now.
I mean, Cambodia, Vietnam. I mean, the destruction is far and wide. And when I talk about reparations to folks, it is about telling the truth about violent extractive capitalist practices that started in 1619 and the idea of people as property and, decimating people because you decide everything in addition, yes, to everything you're saying, but that's part of why talking about repair and reparations is important. Have you all heard the phrase, which made me very angry when I heard it? However, I experienced it my entire life because I was part of a Jewish family for 30 years. Progressive except for Palestine.
Oh, yes.
Oh,
I've never heard that. I've never heard that. That's a thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's a thing that people are taking on as a badge of honor.
Oh,
yeah.
When I learned it was an insult, but
well, here
to us, maybe it is.
Well, I observed it here in Seattle. I have, I observed it here when I moved first to the neighborhood and I was still married. And this family, they were amazing to us. And I mean, we were a mixed family. I mean, Arab and my ex-husband's Jewish. And the husband had nail polish and they were progressive about all the LGBTQ issues. And at one point they came over for dinner and they were talking about going to Israel. And I started to say something like, no, Israel's ours because it's in the Bible. And all of a sudden I was like, it was completely incongruent. So when I heard the term progressive except for Palestine, I was like, oh, I've lived that. I've experienced that. Absolutely. From Zionists who support Israel. But if it was any other two groups of people in the world, it would be clear what.
That's right.
Right? It is insidious to the, yes. Okay.
Well, and I think I just want to name like where I was like trained on this because I went to an anti-racism training for white people because I think a lot of non-Jewish white people, the reason that many of us are progressive except for Palestine is just we don't want to be called anti-Semitic. People are just so scared of that. And I think, we're not as scared of being called like a reverse racist or whatever people might call us in other situations. But I went to this training and it was called the Ann Braden training. It's through the Catalyst Project and it's for white anti-racist organizers. And they did a wonderful job of really grounding us. And they were very clear. They were like, do not be one of those progressive except for Palestine people because that is not integrity and it does not match material reality. And like it was a very rigorous program. We had to do a lot of in-depth reading and they really trained us because it is so common and so insidious.
Meagan, you got some good stuff to go with.
I did want to say, yes, there is this fear of being labeled anti-Semitic, and it does, and also that we have been so trained in this country to be afraid of Arab people. Yes. For so long. And also I wanted to go a little bit back to genocide because I know that, one of the things that happened early on when I started using that word is my mother reached out to me and was just like, hey, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the use of the word genocide in this particular case because it doesn't seem to fit the like actual definition and parameters of genocide. And I I just like kind of talked that through with her a bit, and then she was like, okay. But I think I hear you use quibble about terminology, and I know that words matter, and I know that words are important, and I don't want to say that definitions don't matter, or and I don't like the idea of devaluing the power of a word because it just gets started used willy-nilly or something like that. And I just wanted to bring that up here because I feel like I want to also say that there's a little bit in which I think that's a waste of time, and it's a diversion from the real issue.
That's right. Well, to me, something I've noticed in Unitarian Universalism and in similar realms of life where there's a lot of like generally privileged, often white liberals, is like the centering, of course, repeatedly, of more privileged feelings, right? And I think that a lot of people who have bought into some level of US propaganda, Israeli propaganda, who've really bought into this idea that like, somehow we're the good guys and they're the bad terrorists and all of this, they have these really strong feelings, and especially folks who are Jewish and are experiencing that generational trauma, and have maybe experienced very intense, maybe know people personally in Israel, people who have a much stronger connection, of course, are going to have a much more intense reaction. But whether it's been folks who are Jewish or folks who are not Jewish but have bought into this narrative in my own congregation and in other organizing spaces, people have reacted very strongly, and they really want to focus on the words. And I do think that is like, there is a role to be played, just as there's a role like I have played in like supporting white people with white fragility, right? That's something I have done a lot of, and especially when I was at the UUA. And it's something I took upon myself, like, hey, I'm going to like work with these people who are like, words are hurting my feelings, right? In this moment, I don't see that as my role, because I'm just like, I don't care. If like you want to be upset about a word, I'm upset that people are dying by the minute. But somebody should be definitely working with people who are like upset about words, for sure. And for sure, it's not me, especially with Jewish folks, because I'm not Jewish and that's just not my role. But there are a lot of amazing Jewish organizations and people who are doing that with Jewish folks. And I think there's also amazing people doing it with non-Jewish white folks and folks of other identities. But I agree, like that's about centering fragility, and like that cannot be it just is not my primary focus, because my primary focus is how do we try to get to a ceasefire, try to get to withdrawing U.S. aid from Israel, material reality of our government's actions.
Well, and while people are quibbling about semantics, the bombs are still falling.
Exactly right.
Held. The U.S. is still supporting the bombs falling and the aid being withheld. So, we need to be really clear that what we need is a ceasefire, and what we need is unrestricted aid flowing into Gaza.
Right.
So that people don't continue to die.
Right.
Every hospital in Gaza has been bombed.
Yeah.
There are no functional hospitals
right
in Gaza right now. What do we call that, right? Like human rights violation, atrocity, war crime.
Right.
Like, pick your word. It's not going to be a good word.
Right. No.
Yeah. There's so much. So I don't even know where to take this right now. I think in terms of Unitarian Universalism, I do want to say that my understanding in interfaith circles is that rabbis in more and less conservative spaces are having as hard a time as you ministers in terms of split congregations. That they're what people don't know how to talk about this and what to do, because I think it's not thankfully there are a lot who do and have moral clarity. I'm going to preach this Sunday on moral clarity when we have differences of opinion. And to me, this isn't about a difference of opinion. It's about reality. Right. And the one of the things that I've had to now finally say to myself, I can't, I know already what's happening. But the gaslighting that continues to happen from our government and the Israeli government, the fucking gaslighting is just beyond like it is an assault on the senses. Like I'm like, for one more person says Hamas to me, I'm like, they're a resistance organization. You could hate them all you want, but know that they were funded by the Likud party, and Netanyahu's on tape saying Hamas is good for us because they didn't want the Palestinian Liberation Organization or the Palestinian Authority, who were going to work with the Israelis for peace. They did not want them to win. So everybody, talk about, educate yourselves, just learn about how the ultra right wing in Israel supported Hamas, so now they can use them as a pawn. And if, yes, October 7th was horrendous, and now Gaza has had 10 October 7ths every fucking day, every hour since October 8th.
Right.
And it's just okay, so what I started with is UU spaces. I think so Daniel Mate responded to Brene Brown in a 45-minute. We're going to link to it. 45. Please watch it. Everybody watching this, please take the 45 minutes, because he breaks down exactly what's the problem with her statement that she put out. But this is also an education for every single person who thinks like her. And one of the things he talks about is, because she talks about Israelis or Jewish students not feeling comfortable on campus. And he's like, no one has a right to comfort. No one has a right to comfort. You know who's on? And he talked about the 3 Palestinian young men wearing keffiyehs who were shot in fucking Burlington, Vermont. So by a person who went to a UU church, a white man who was known by UU congregations. So in UU spaces, like beyond the fucking white supremacy teaching, beyond that, like, no one has a right to comfort when we are. I've been accused of a lot of things because I don't center people's comfort. I try to be so deeply compassionate. When this all started, I got calls from confused Christians in general, like UUs who were Christian, who were like, what the fuck? And I was like, look, my Jewish siblings in spirit are living with generational trauma. I mean, I was trying to be so understanding. And it's not that I have lost that understanding. Right now, I just feel like at what point can you?
Yes.
At what point? Like this is now, right. What are we on, day 140? Like,
right.
I'm going to be quiet now, but I just.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I mean about, like, I think it's important to get clear. Something I was talking to my board last night, because they were talking about, what are we doing about this and whatever. And I was just like, let's be clear on why we're going to do whatever we're going to do. Let's be clear on why. Mm-hmm. And if we are going to temper our language, if we are going to do, emotional support of folks who are centering their own fragile feelings, that might be for a good reason if it's strategic. You know what I mean? But let's be clear that it's strategy, that it's not truth, right? And because you sometimes, like I said, I've done a lot of work with other white folks on white fragility, and it's strategy, because sometimes you got to help people move along, and I think that's a perfectly reasonable ministry for UUs to be doing if that is what you're doing. But if what you're doing is saying it's somehow morally superior to be in the middle or to have a both sides, that's not true. It's not moral. It's not helpful. But making a big tent can be sometimes strategic,
Before we have about 15 minutes left, I do want to talk about Aaron Bushnell, the very young, he's 25-year-old,
yes,
active duty member of the Air Force. And I just want to read his last words. He engaged in immolation. He set himself on fire in front of the Israeli government. This is now the second person in the last few months to do this, or no?
The first person was in Atlanta, right, outside the Israeli embassy, and this one was in Washington, D.C.
And this was in Washington, D.C. And his last words were, "My name is Aaron Bushnell. I am an active duty member of the U.S. Air Force, and I will no longer be complicit in genocide. I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest, but compared to what people in Palestine have been experiencing at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all. This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal. Free Palestine." And he was born in 1999 and died just a few days ago at the age of 25. Yeah, my children are exactly his age, and I mean, I think about that with obviously the Palestinian children under 50% of the Gazan population was under 18, 50%. And hearing Israeli government people say there are no innocent children, there are no innocent Palestinians is gruesome. And we are sending military. I mean, he was called on. It was a mandatory deployment, and Aaron Bushnell said no, in the most powerful, extreme way. And I just wanted to make sure we said his name. So
yeah, for sure. Thank you for that. I've been thinking about him a lot, listening to what others have been saying, and the ways in which on following the social media folks who I'm following who are either in Gaza or the West Bank or who are Palestinian Americans living here in the US and what they have been sharing about him. And I think that there is such a deep feeling of helplessness right now for those of us who feel so like incredibly, I mean, there's anger and there's helplessness and hopelessness and frustration and just this deep, deep feeling of absolute dismay. And I was experiencing that myself for a couple of months and feeling just really alone. And I still feel it and experience it, but it has helped so much to connect with others. It's helped so much as a UU leader, finding other people, other UUs that I could talk to about this and to organize and to get involved and to write and call elected representatives and to donate money and raise money for humanitarian aid organizations and to participate in protests, getting my body being one more number counted out there. And of course, it's easy for me in New York City. I can walk out the door and find a protest on any given day. And it's also really easy not to do it. And it's really easy to just scroll through my Instagram feed and cry. So, I balance between it, and I think people get upset about about those of us who are sharing what's going on over and over again. And it's just kind of like, I've seen some of the responses of like, oh, you're so tired of hearing about this. Well, imagine how somebody living in Gaza feels like, there's that reaction. Of course, it's like, I think it's people don't want to hear about it because they don't know what to do. And I think the more we can give people things to do to make a positive, even if it's a tiny little positive impact, maybe it's talking to a relative, maybe it's talking to your mom when she calls you about using the word genocide, when you don't want to, or whatever it may be, do something, because there's a lot of potential Aaron Bushnells out there. People are hurting and very, very upset. And it breaks my heart. I think he was so brave. He was so hurt. It's a lot to take in. And then people just saying, oh, well, he had mental health problems. That's another part of the gaslighting.
And I think, I forget whoever said that, like, basically, like, you can't adjust to an insane world or whatever. There's some great quote about that.
That was adjusted, Martin Luther King Jr.
There we go. But I think, like, if you actually, like, take in the full reality of our globe, like, what he did is perfectly sane. It makes perfect sense. Actually, what's insane is like coping and living, but we like have to, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I think it's like about, I think we like, why we need spiritual community is so that exactly what you were saying, Meagan, like we can gather and grapple with the fact that on the one hand, like our species is actively destroying the planet and each other with a few powerful elites running everything and just like ruining everything. And it's so deeply horrific, and there's so many layers of horror and injustice and death that like it seems like very reasonable to just like set yourself on fire, right? Like that's sane, that makes sense. But on the other hand, we want to perpetuate our species and our families. We want to love each other. We want to like get the beauty in this dying world. And so I think like finding like I never feel like I found that place, right? Between like the despair and reality and the like coping, acting normal, and like the like taking action that has integrity, right? Like I'm always trying to find the mix, and I think that's what we can do together, but taking action has to be in the mix. The only way to not go to one of those two sides of like defeat, despair, or like just like put on your you don't look, it is to take action. I completely agree. And I one thing I wanted to highlight was the State of the Union action in DC on March 7th. I don't know if we shared the link, but it's peopledemand.org, and you can go and you can sign up if you're willing to go to DC for that. And there's also a lot of similar actions in other like your own city might have one, your own town might have one. Awesome, sharing it. So that's one option. There's lots of options, but that's one that you can sign up for. And if you sign up, people will follow up with you, and get you plugged in.
And along those lines, I just want to make share a personal story, because I don't own. I got ordained on October 8th
of 2023.
Yes.
Wow.
So I'm a new minister and an assistant minister, and I'm in New York City and in Brooklyn, and there's just a lot, right? And I also do not own a Side with Love stole or collar shirt or anything like that. So and there was a call for an interfaith clergy affinity group to show up at a protest recently, at a rally and a march and a protest, the Dump APEC in Manhattan that happened last week. And so I did, I reached out and I found a colleague in the area who had a Side with Love stole, and he brought it to me at my congregation and dropped it off so that I could borrow it. And I wore this stole and a collar. I did both. I was just like, okay, I'm just going to show up like clergy. I'm going to do both. And I went to this protest and this rally. And I mean, the only other visible clergy that I saw were Jewish rabbis. And I was wearing the big bright yellow thing. And so many people came up to me. They were like, oh, a Unitarian. Oh, are you a Unitarian minister? And somebody came up to me and said, you did our, your church had held our father's memorial, and I remember you. And, it was just, there were a lot of older folks there. This wasn't like one of the younger, like, protests. This was like a lot of older people, a lot of deeply faithful people singing and chanting and marching. And it was just amazing. I just want to put a plug out there for, if you do feel like you can put yourself out there like that, to be visible with a Side with Love kind of something. And after the recent UUA statement, I felt like I could do that even more now. And it just was really meaningful to UUs or UU adjacent folks who were so excited to finally see a UU visibly out there, which they have not been seeing, at least not in New York City.
Thank you. I want to lift up two things we talked about before we came on air. One is Anera. It is based in Jordan and helps, or maybe based.
They have a DC office, but and they're around. They have a couple different locations, but yes, they do have an office in Jordan, I think.
And also, it was hard. I just learned of this morning. Birds of Gaza.
Yeah,
and it is children in the United States are crafting birds and putting the names of dead Palestinian children on these colorful birds.
Mm-hmm.
And these are 9-year-olds, 5-year-olds. I'm just going through, actually it's all over the world, who are, and it's haunting. And I didn't know this was out there. So I just, it was like, wow, that's,
yeah.
Somebody asked me, I was at these senior ministers of large congregations. Michael, Chris, and I went, and every time I talk about this, it's rare that I don't cry. And afterwards, somebody said, "Are you Palestinian?" I said, I was born in Egypt. Every Arab right now is Palestinian. Like there's no separation right now.
Mm-hmm.
So
there are
10 minutes left. Yeah.
Well, just to say that there are Arabs all over the world who are just, like they feel like, their families are dying too. This is very, very close to home and painful. And this impacts all of us. It just really does impact all of us. And when we, as UUs or as white people or as United Statesians who are not Arab, don't consider the Arab population and just kind of erase them, it's so dehumanizing. What is happening is so dehumanizing, and they have been so dehumanized in order to get to this point. So I just feel like that's not, in our UU circles, that's just not acknowledged enough and not brought up enough.
Yes.
No, because people are more worried about being called anti-Semitic. Nobody gives a shit about being anti-Arab. Frankly, that's how it feels from where I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that makes the Birds of Gaza project, I don't know what to call it exactly, so powerful is that it's rehumanizing these otherwise nameless, faceless children who've been murdered. And that has to, if that doesn't pierce you through the heart, like you need to start unwrapping the defenses that you've put up around your heart, because it has to. 30,000 Gazans are dead, and 60% of the population of Gaza are under 18. So do the math, right? If that doesn't make you cry on the regular, think about why.
Mm-hmm.
Think about why.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
so I, for one, appreciate your emotional realness, Aisha.
I appreciate you, Michael. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know how to be any other way. So in our last couple minutes, if either of you want to have any final thoughts, and thank you again, really, for showing up today.
I just wanted to acknowledge our bud in the chat here who has been sharing a lot, and I appreciate it, and a lot of brilliant things. And I don't know you at all, I don't think, but I just want to acknowledge, like, one of your comments, you said, yeah, I feel helpless. And I think a lot of us do, and I think it's really understandable. And I think, like, in general about, like, climate change and fascism, but then in this specific instance, when we are witnessing a massive genocide that is, like, being live streamed and we still can't stop it, like,
Mm-hmm.
it is a certain kind of horror.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't have any solution other than to, like, keep moving and keep connecting with people who are also mourning and crying and acting and making art. And, like, that's the only way, because it's, feeling helpless and hopeless is reasonable. And our faith tells us we don't stop there. So we just move somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, move somehow and be in community with others, be in relationship with others. Don't want to discount the fact that there is also a loneliness epidemic happening in our world and in our country, and that suicide rates are up 33%. So, that could be around a little bit more reporting, but, like, be with other people. And that I also just wanted to say that for Unitarian Universalists, in terms of, like, a theology and who we are as a people of faith, absolutely we want Jews to be safe. Absolutely. And Israel's actions don't make Jews safer.
That's right.
And we need to examine that. And if, as Unitarian Universalists, we truly believe that our safety is all interdependent, then we need to really lean into and understand that Jewish safety cannot come at the expense of Palestinian safety.
Oh, thank you. That is the perfect place to end. This is not making anyone safer, most especially Jewish people, and certainly, obviously, not the Palestinians. Thank you all so much. I honor you all, and I am grateful to be connected. Thank you. And we'll see you all next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you for joining us. Special thanks to those of you who give generously to this ministry. It is because of you that this ministry is possible. You can click the link in the description to give now, or visit clfuu.org/give for more information. We hope you will join us next week for another episode of The VUU.